Welcome to this week's episode of Taiwan Tech Update, your weekly roundup of tech news stories from here in Taiwan, presented by me, Tomasz Koper, and Radio Taiwan International. This week, I spoke about all things drones with Bryce Barros, an associate fellow at GLOBSEC, visiting fellow at the Institute for National Defense and Security Research, and a former national security advisor for U.S. Senate. Do stick around to the second part of the show if you're interested in drones or in how Taiwan is doing at manufacturing them at scale. But first, as always, we start with the roundup of Taiwan-related tech news stories for the week of May 16th to May 22nd. We start on Saturday when a prominent U.S. venture capitalist and former Facebook executive Chamath Palihapitiya made some pretty controversial statements on Taiwan. On his All In podcast, he said Taiwan would lose its strategic importance in the semiconductor industry in 18 months. Why 18 months? Well, he said it's because the US is now probably just 1 or 2 nanometers behind from achieving what they strategically need Taiwan for. He added that Taiwan's current importance is economic, and if you remove that factor, attitudes towards Taiwan would be very different. He was subsequently slammed on social media for ignoring the fact that Taiwan is a country of 23 million people. But I guess it's an honest mistake for a venture capitalist to make. Most of them don't seem to think in terms of people, but rather money. But even tech experts didn't take very well to Palihapitiya's hot take. Tech commentator Daniel Jeffries pointed out that Taiwan's advantage in semiconductors is not just in the node size, but also in areas like yield rates, packaging technology, memory integration, substrates, manufacturing equipment, supply chain coordination, and expertise, which has been accumulated over a long period of time. Jeffries ended jokingly with a similarly silly take. We're only 18 months away from replacing the global oil system because we've built a pretty good electric bicycle. I can't think of a better summary, so I'll just leave it there. And speaking of accumulation of expertise and serving as an antidote to hot takes that ignore human capital, Taiwanese students won 8 awards, including 2 gold at the 2026 RoboFest at Lawrence Technical University in Michigan. The almost 3 decades-long event is one of the top international events for robotics design, promoting science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. It allows teams from all over the world to compete in robotics and programming. Vice President Xiaobi Kim said that this showcases the strong science foundations and competitiveness of Taiwanese students. The 2 gold medalists include the Gangqiao High School in New Taipei, who took the top prize in the Advanced Medical Robotics category, and Washington International School in Taichung, who came in first in the Advanced Creative category. On Monday, Taiwan's digital minister Lin Yijing said in a social media post that Amazon Leo is expected to launch its services globally in the first half of next year, which includes Taiwan. The Leo in Amazon Leo stands for Low Earth Orbit, and the company will be competing in the satellite internet space with SpaceX's Starlink. Starlink doesn't consider Taiwan to be a high-priority market since the country's 4 and 5G coverage is pretty much complete. Taiwan telecom provider Far EasTone stands to benefit from the move since the company owns the 28 GHz frequency band required for Amazon's satellite internet service. Chunghwa Telecom, one of the other big 3 operators in Taiwan, is also willing to compete in the market. Last year, Chunghwa obtained commercial licenses for OneWeb's LEO satellites and O3b MEO, which stands for Medium Earth Orbit. It is also planning a strategic partnership with the US-based company Astronis. This isn't just about bringing you the latest episode of your streaming show wherever you are. Having multiple operators using different technologies is important in areas like disaster relief, connectivity for truly remote areas, maritime and aviation communication, and IoT. Also on Monday, Taiwan's economy ministry introduced a new plan which will require big electricity consumers, which includes electronics and semiconductor manufacturers, to implement energy efficiency audits by the end of 2027 and submit 5-year energy conservation plans in 2028. This matters to Taiwan's tech sector since the country still largely relies on imports to satisfy its power hungry industries. A penny saved is a penny earned, and the same goes for every kilowatt hour, especially when it comes to you on an LNG tanker. On Tuesday, Taiwan officially opened a new smart robotics innovation and application R&D center at ITRI, the Industrial Technology Research Institute. The ceremony included demonstrations of application projects in 4 areas: healthcare, logistics, food services, and inspection and disaster relief. Vice President Xiaobi Kim said at the event that while the world is abuzz with talk about AI, the government aims to bring them closer to Taiwanese people's everyday life and make them a tool for industrial development. She said that robotics is key to maintaining Taiwan's competitive edge as the country faces the challenges of an aging population, low birth rates, and labor shortages. She added that Taiwan must not only be a hardware manufacturing powerhouse, but must become a key exporter of smart integration systems. Staying with the events of Tuesday, the world's leading manufacturer of semiconductor production equipment, ASML, said that it expects to see the first products made with its next-gen high-NA EUV, or extreme ultraviolet light, to hit the market within the next few months. Taiwan's TSMC, which is ASML's biggest customer, had previously said that EUV machines are just too expensive. Intel, on the other hand, seems to be a lot more open to this new technology and bought EUV equipment from ASML in 2023. ASML says that despite the cost of over $20 billion a pop, these machines can reduce patterning costs for the most advanced chips, be it logic or memory. I guess we will soon, well, maybe soonish, find out if the technology, as impressive as it is, makes economic sense for semiconductor makers. And we end this week's tech news review with a look ahead. On Thursday, the consultancy KPMG released its 2026 Global Semiconductor Industry Survey, which included 151 senior executives in the industry. According to the document, 54% of those surveyed said they expect their revenue to grow by at least 11% in the near future, driven, unsurprisingly, by sustained demand for AI and data centers. Despite constant geopolitical and resource risks, the confidence in the industry seems to be on the rise. And I can see why. The global semiconductor market is expected to reach $1 trillion in value this year, with logic and memory showing the strongest momentum. The Taiwanese drone industry has been in the news a lot lately. So this week I spoke to Bryce Barros, a former national security advisor for US Senate and currently an associate fellow at GLOBSEC and a visiting fellow at the Institute for National Defense and Security Research. I wanted to talk about the industry and how it relates to Taiwan's national defense. Here's how our conversation went. Bryce, what is the current condition of Taiwan-US drone cooperation?
I think right now that US-Taiwan drone cooperation is very nascent. So you're starting to see a lot of the different linkages that are coming about between drone makers in the United States as well as Taiwan at this very moment, right? So you're getting more companies that are being interested in coming into this market, right? I think the big turning point for where you could really see cooperation between Taiwan and the United States start to really ramp up, or rather interest really start to ramp up, was at last year's Taipei Aerospace and Defense Technology Exhibition, right? And you could tell by the large number of American, Taiwanese, as well as other third country drone companies over there and OEM component companies over there. So right now, there's a lot of room to grow. And as you can tell by some of the different research that's been published, even though there's a lot of potential for US Taiwan drone cooperation, much of that cooperation still hasn't grown as much as it should and as much as it could. And at the moment, Taiwan actually is selling more drones in Europe than in the United States. But that doesn't mean that that could always remain that way. And there's a lot of different factors that sort of bleed into where US Taiwan drone cooperation could potentially grow even further in the coming years.
What are some of those factors?
So, some of the factors that come to mind is you're increasingly starting to see more large, and not just drones, but defense tech in general as a catch all, companies wanting to come to Taiwan and collaborate on a whole host of things, right? So, that could be everything from research and development to exploring supply chain cooperation, because it's not just about whole units, right? Or whole, unmanned systems or anything within that sort of broader basket. It's also about components. Components are a huge part of that. And Taiwan having a massive advantage in terms of the different OEM sort of components that are manufactured across the island fitting into drones in general, to potential co-production, right? So actual Taiwan, US, or Taiwan third country drone companies making entire drones here, or significant parts of their drones here together, to companies that are also really interested in coming here and making their own sort of potential factories as well. So there's a lot of different stuff that kind of goes within that sort of realm, and interest from the United States of wanting to bring some drone companies from Taiwan to the United States, either to have sort of like third country sort of setups or do co-production in the United States as well. So there's a lot of very nascent beginning stage cooperation going on with far more sort of room to improve, not only in those sort of aspects, but also thinking about the broader sort of ecosystems that they all sort of fit into.
Well, one of the things that the Taiwanese government likes to highlight is Taiwan's technical prowess. How much of advantage do you think that really is, having those OEMs here, having those companies here? And how much are drones just a numbers game, all about outproducing rather than outspecking your adversary?
So, yeah, I mean, the OEM thing is a huge, huge factor for Taiwan and a massive advantage. And one of the reasons why Taiwan can have so many original equipment manufacturers, i.e., OEMs for the listeners, is because of its own electronic manufacturing prowess, right? Because I think there's a tendency when you think about ecosystems or collaboration between Taiwan and the United States, or Taiwan and Europe, or Taiwan and other sort of third countries, is it's about just making systems in general, like complete whole units, which is fine. I mean, there's obviously companies that have done that well and have gotten somewhat of a foothold within, aspects of the United States sort of national security sort of ecosystem, as well as dual use applications, right? So Thunder Tiger being the only Taiwan drone company that happens to be the UAS Blue List, and the UAS Blue List happens to be sort of like the list of like drones that have been vetted and by that I mean commercial drones that have been vetted by the U.S. government in terms of cybersecurity, privacy, and supply chain standards that don't include parts from potential, adversaries abroad. That's like used by the U.S. Department of Defense and is under the National Defense Authorization Act. So that's the only company that's been able to do that. But if you table that aside, having all these small and medium-sized enterprises that produce very niche things that are a part of the broader OEM ecosystem is a really big boon for Taiwan's drone ecosystem here and future collaborations. And without the ability to make all those different sort of components through SMEs, I don't know if Taiwan would be as successful in this ecosystem as it could be. And when it comes to specs, I think it really depends, right? I mean, once again, putting the emphasis on dual use, not just drones that are being talked about as dual use, but are being used potentially for civilian and or military purposes. Specs, it depends, right? So if you're thinking about something that's a commercial end system, so a system that could fly with a certain weight, right? So I'm thinking maybe systems that are over 25 kg or even over 50 kg. It could be used from everything from surveying to transporting things to just monitoring stuff in a civilian capacity, right? That could be very different from the kind of drone that you would need specifications for that would be easily attritable in the so-called hellscape strategy to defend Taiwan asymmetrically. So, one end, you need a little bit more high-end sort of things that fit into that, i.e., the commercial drone that I was just referring, or hypothetical commercial drones I was referring to over certain weight classes, versus drones that are much more lower quality, but having many of those drones at a lower quality creates a quality unto itself, right? To be able to overwhelm and attrit a potential adversary. So that's where all those things kind of fit in together, in my opinion.
Well, you mentioned Thunder Tiger, and Thunder Tiger was one of the 20 companies that recently participated in the Exponential Defense and Drone Expo in the US last week,
Yep.
and reportedly attracting attention of those seeking non red drone supply chains, meaning not involving China. How is the world doing in general when it comes to decoupling from China and making drones? China, being the traditional powerhouse in drone production. How are we doing in making our drones non-red?
I think right now it's still very difficult. It's always going to be an uphill sort of battle, mostly because of how much China dominates many of their own sort of cheaply produced OEM components, as well as the critical sort of minerals that bleed into broader sort of supply chains as well. So you're never most likely going to get a drone that's made in Taiwan that'll be as cheap as something from DJI or whatever that's made in China. That said, there has been a lot of leaps and bounds in terms of companies that are interested in coming here and just broader sort of market incentives moving away from China for different companies or customers that want to buy drones that are not from, you know, parts that are made by China. But I do think there's a lot more that needs to be done. And one of the opportunities to do that would be whatever sort of supplemental would come with the recently passed special defense budget to support Taiwan's local drone and broader defense industrial base, which includes defense technologies as well. And it should be really interesting to see what that sort of means given this week. And, one of the things that is happening this week is I'm going to Prague to attend GLOBSEC's annual conference as an associate fellow for GLOBSEC. And while we're there should be a significant or a decently sized Taiwan component or delegation there, including with Foreign Minister Lin Jialong. It should be interesting to see what that sort of delegation is able to sort of seek from the Czechs, given Czechia is so crucial to purchasing drones from Taiwan as well as a part of that non-red supply chain ecosystem broadly.
That's right. According to recent numbers from DSIT from a couple of weeks ago, drone exports to Poland and Czechia, which are suspected to be really destined for Ukraine, went from 2,500 in 2024 to something like 100,000 in 2025. That feels like a staggering rate. So, given that, what do you expect to be on the agenda at GLOBSEC this week when it comes to drones and Taiwan?
So there's a couple different things I really expect to kind of come up broadly in with GLOBSEC this year. And I think one of the top things that should be really interesting is, and this doesn't necessarily have to do with the topic of what we're discussing at hand, but as someone who is you being a European, I think the bigger sort of thing is the broader push into wanting to make Europe more independent when it comes to its own defense initiatives and defense industrial bases. And a big part of that to make that happen, not only in terms of what is being discussed for GLOBSEC, but also broadly speaking, is seeking partners to do things for co-production or co-development or what have you, right? So I actually have a piece coming out in International Politique in the coming weeks discussing that broadly, not about defense tech, but just in general. And you're noticing a lot of trends of European countries seeking out third countries outside of the region to co-produce for defense industrial issues, right? I know that the exact theme this year for GLOBSEC Forum 2026 is the global systemic transformation, 21st solutions to 21st challenges. And that's really trying to come with a reckoning with, what has been now more than 4 years of a illegal invasion, full-scale invasion of Ukraine since 2022, but also looking into what's happening in the Middle East as well as here in the Indo-Pacific. And, some of the sort of issues you have with the broader sort of so-called rules-based international order. So I think if you kind of include within that, Taiwan has a lot of different opportunities. The defense tech stuff being key, as you mentioned, with the DSET sort of numbers provided, but also, Taiwan could potentially provide insights into things like hybrid warfare strategies that China tries to do. There are things that Taiwanese delegates can learn from delegates that are going to be visiting or attending as speakers from GLOBSEC from places like the Middle East, for example. So one notable participant this year that sticks out to me is you've got Jassem Daiwi, who is the Secretary General of the Cooperation Council of the Arab states in the Gulf, right? Hypothetically speaking, delegates from all over, not just Taiwan, like Ukraine and other places too, might be able to gain some insights or share insights into sort of what Gulf Arab countries have been dealing with in terms of counter drone issues as related to Iran, right? So there's a whole host of things that a Taiwan delegation can gain from, in addition to, someone like Foreign Minister Lin, having the opportunity to speak with heads of government, heads of state, other sort of like senior policymakers, right? So the big speaker this year, for example, is going to be President Pavel from the Czech Republic. But there'll be other, individuals there too. And over the course of the 3 days of the conference, there might be opportunities to make connections that Taiwan normally would not be able to officially at a government-to-government level through a Track 1.5 dialogue that GLOBSEC Forum offers.
Thank you very much for this conversation. Bryce Barros, Associate Fellow at GLOBSEC, Visiting Fellow at the Institute for National Defense and Security Research here in Taiwan, and a former National Security Advisor for U.S. Senate.
Thank you, Tomas. I really appreciate it.
And that's all I have for you in this week's edition of Taiwan Tech Update. Thank you for staying with me, and if you have any ideas or opinions on the show, its format, topics, or just technology in general, you can email them to me at Tomasz, that's TOMASZ, at rti.org.tw. Please include Taiwan Tech Update or TTU in the subject line. I'm your host, Tomasz Koper, and I'll be back with another update next week.